Donald Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, had a very important hearing in federal court, and there are questions about what happened there. We have an interesting thing in these prosecutions coming out of Georgia. We know that there are 19 total co-defendants in the case. It's a RICO case involving conspiracy. But what happens when we start to sever cases? What happens when we have some people have a trial very quickly under speedy trial rules? Other people have trials late. What happens if we have some trials happening in the federal court because there are federal officials that need to be prosecuted in federal court versus other officials who are not federal officials that stay in state court? It could be complex. But today we had a hearing on this one. Meadows is trying to remove himself from federal court and to dismiss the case, to segment himself out from all of the other co-defendants. And one interesting thing happens when with co-defendants, and prosecutors try to exploit this, is to get people to point their fingers at each other, offer them plea deals, get their statements on the record so that they can use them against other people as they continue to pursue charges. So what happened in Mark Meadows' case? Well, he took the stand, apparently. Pretty amazing. We saw that there was a series of questions that came back, and he was supposed to be due back in court, likely in for a long afternoon, says Anna Bauer. Might go back into another day, right? So some serious testimony was happening in court. No phones were allowed in court. We're not able to see a live tweet thread. Instead, what we've got is some reporting after the hearing took place. And apparently, we see that Meadows testifies today, and some people are saying he pointed the finger at Trump. Now, I'm always skeptical about these framings, but we'll see. And this would not be unusual. And the question is, does that matter? So what? If everybody points their fingers at Trump saying, he told me to do the thing. So what if he's allowed to do the thing? If you're allowed to investigate elections, if you're the executive branch and part of your job is to execute federal elections, you run the DOJ and these things, you're allowed to ask questions. So if they point the fingers back, so what? He is the root source of the power because he was the president. The article tells us that a battle over whether to move the case from state level to federal level is underway, and Mark Meadows testified today, which caught people by surprise, stated emphatically that he believed that his actions detailed in the indictment fell within his scope as duties as chief of staff. This is what he's saying gives two things. One, immunity to justify a dismissal, and two, removal to pull this up from state court. He also appeared, according to the New York Times, unsure of himself at times, saying often that he could not recall details of the events in late 2020, early 2021. My wife will tell you sometimes I forget to take out the trash. Oh, I love that. Yeah, I can be very forgetful too. Yeah, it happens, Mark. I understand. He told Judge Steve C. And by the way, don't think that that is unusual, okay? Hillary forgot everything. She forgot everything. So did Mark Elias and Michael Sussman. Remember those guys? They forgot everything when they were framing Trump. At another point during the day-long hearing, Meadows asked whether he was properly complying with the judge's instructions. Is this going the way you want it, Judge? I'm in enough trouble as it is. The effort to shift the case to federal court is the first major fight. Meadows testified in this court proceeding. Meadows testified that Mr. Trump directed him to set up the now famous phone call on January 2nd between Trump and Brad Raffensperger. This is the phone call that the media hyperventilates about because Trump asked Raffensperger to, quote, find 12,000 more Trump votes that would flip the outcome, which is what you talk about when you are in an election. You got to talk about things called votes. You got to talk about the number of those votes so that you can identify the margin between what you lost by if you're going to have a question about that. Now, find the votes means you can do an audit and discover them, right? Or you can find some error that disqualifies whatever it is, legally. Doesn't say create 12,000 votes. Doesn't say fabricate 12,000 votes. Nothing. Meadows testified in court. He said, I was asked to reach out. But he did say that Mr. Trump wanted to make the call because he believed fraud occurred genuinely and wanted to resolve questions about ballot signature verification process. Meadows said, we all want accurate elections. He also testified that after being subpoenaed by the prosecution, Raffensperger testified. So he said that after being subpoenaed by the prosecution, he said, I had ignored calls from Mark Meadows. I didn't think it was appropriate, so I tried to avoid those calls. He says, I tried to avoid the call with Trump too. He said, outreach to this extent was extraordinary. If the effort to move the case to federal court succeeds, it could benefit the Trump side. It could broaden the jury pool. This is what they're petrified about. Beyond Fulton County into outlying counties where he's got more support rather than a dark blue county. It could also slow down at least some of the proceedings. Chesapeake, Sidney Powell have already requested speedy trials. They're probably going to get them as it stands now. Meadows was also cross-examined. Somebody named Anna Cross was there, apparently a veteran prosecutor, worked there in Atlanta. He continually pressed him on what kind of federal policy or interest he was advancing. Meadows said essentially his job has been to simply help the president. That's all I do. I help the president. When Trump had concerns about elections, he said, I looked into them because they could result in policy changes about election integrity. She says, well, when you visited Cobb County in Georgia, where they were auditing ballots, what were you doing there? Says, in his mind, there were still allegations worthy of investigation. Meadows has been charged with racketeering and the other crimes. And so that's essentially what happened. Now, I also saw this article from Politico, and they're telling us, listen to how this works. You know, we talk about how they, in the media, will conjugate headlines, how they'll just change the language to give it certain emotions. So here you see this headline. Mark Meadows takes the stand in a bid to derail Georgia criminal charges. Or, you know, maybe like defend himself or like tell the truth or testify. Mark Meadows testifies in Georgia prosecution. Why is he derailing criminal charges? Don't we have the presumption of innocence in this country? They're not automatic. Same story here. He was in there for 2.5 hours testifying during the morning session, and then it came back. If they argue that it's within the scope, Meadows may be immune from the charges against him because they're currently brought under state law. So we'll see if Mark Meadows floats that or what happens with this, and we'll get updates on that soon. But this is what the people on the left were saying about all of this. And something I noticed about this, we'll listen to a little bit here. We've got two people. This is MSNBC. This is Jen Psaki, right? Where did Jen Psaki come from? Jen Psaki came from the White House, right? And so the White House has their little roadmap, right? You got somebody who gets a job there. They do the shill thing for a year, then they go get a job at MSNBC. But something else is interesting. We've also got this guy, Neil Katyal, who they call a legal analyst, but he's a former Solicitor General, also worked for the government. He's a regular on this. They call him a MSNBC legal analyst. So we've got one person comes out of the government, lands here. Another person comes out of the government, lands here. And guess what? Another person comes out of the government and lands here. This is Andrew Weissman, former FBI General Counsel. Okay, so this guy lands from the FBI. One person lands from the White House. One person lands from the FBI. And this guy lands from the Department of Justice, Office of the Inspector General. And now they're all going to sit around here and talk about how everything that's happening here is totally legitimate. The same people who orchestrated this are all going to sit around and talk about how legitimate this is. This is their old employers. These are their old friends. These are their old institutions. They're all anti-Trump. And once they leave the agency, they just go get a job somewhere else, but their friends still work there. And so this is them just playing the patty cake game.
By popular demand, joining me now is who else but the law firm. Neil Katyal is the former acting U.S. Solicitor General, and Andrew Weissman is the former FBI General Counsel. And I'm so thrilled to have you here on set with me today, Neil. So there's so many different components of this week, and I want to dig into as many as possible. A judge granted Kenneth Chesebro's request for a speedy trial. Sidney Powell filed her own request. There are also reports that John Eastman is asking for the same thing. That means that a number of these co-defendants would be separated from Donald Trump. What does that mean for Trump's case?
Okay, so there's two January 6th cases. There's the Georgia one going on that you're talking about now, and then there's the federal one, which Jack Smith has asked for a trial to begin on January 2nd of 2024.
But that's
with respect to this request from Ken Chesebro, who is one of the architects of the January 6th coup.
Who's walking around free, all these people.
Said, I want a trial right away on October 23rd. Fani Willis, the prosecutor, says, yeah, game on. The judge says, fine, game on. So what this means is that the first January 6th trial will happen. It will likely be
in Georgia.
In Georgia, and it will likely be just Mr. Chesebro or perhaps with Sidney Powell, who's also asked for a fast trial. But it won't likely involve Donald Trump or the other 16 defendants that are named in the indictment. But that means it's a signal this stuff is starting to happen. And if you're Donald Trump, you've got to be very worried.
Well, I don't know that we're necessarily worried about it, but one concern with some of this stuff is just what we saw previously with Mark Meadows. Okay, Mark Meadows is now saying stuff. So when everybody comes out to testify and when everybody starts to litigate their own cases, you might start to hear some things between all these different co-defendants who are all kind of on their own that might be troubling for other co-defendants. And we're obviously analyzing this case from the Trump frame of reference. And so we're all kind of asking ourselves, what are the consequences for Trump? But we don't know what these other 18 co-defendants, where their heads are at, whether they care at all about Trump, right? I would imagine many of them do, but maybe one of them doesn't. Maybe two of them don't. Maybe, I don't know what Kenneth Chesebro's strategy is, or, what Sidney Powell's going to do. Or are some of these people going to defend themselves at the expense of other co-defendants or other Trump in particular, right? Is Fani going to put pressure on somebody to flip somebody or something? And as these other things happen outside of the Trump bubble, we get questions about what those are. We don't know. There could be nothing that pops up, but there are variables that pop up and we just don't know exactly what it is. And so in court, we like to keep things as contained as possible, as minimal surprises as we can possibly have. And when you have all of these fast moves, fast trials, Sidney going, other guys going, it starts to create some volatility that may lead to some trouble.
So, Andrew, just to pick it up where Neil left it there, why should Donald Trump be worried? What does it mean for his case?
So I think there's the court of public opinion, and there's also the issue of just, the legal court. So just let's focus on the court of public opinion. As you mentioned, Jen, in your intro, I mean, what Donald Trump is trying to do is litigate this in the court of public opinion and just spin facts to say this election was stolen. Right. As Neil pointed out, that is very soon going to be in a forum that he cannot control, and he won't even be a defendant in that courtroom. So there will be facts and law that is going to be going on at the end of October in Georgia. And there actually is going to be a hearing tomorrow with respect to Mark Meadows, where again, facts and law will be presented and Donald Trump will not be there to spin his version. So I think just from sort of what's going to go on in court, but also his whole play, which is to try.
I think he's kind of making the same point that something volatile could happen, but I don't buy the premise that Trump is able to spin in court at all. He's not been able to do that at all. He gets steamrolled in court. He got steamrolled by Judge Kaplan in the E. Jean Carroll case. He just got steamrolled by Judge Chutkan in this case, 2 extra months to review 11 million pages of discovery. So even when he is there, like even when Trump is in court, he's not allowed to twist anything. The government and the DOJ and the judges twist everything against him anyway. So I don't know that I agree with that critique. I think that regardless of Trump's presence, he's still going to, I think, win in the court of public opinion either way, unless we do get a defendant who flips and joins Fannie for whatever reason and something surprising comes out. But I just don't think there is anything there.
In a place where he can just make up the facts and the law that he wants.
Like you guys do?
That is going to be really hard for him going forward because you have these divergent defendants wanting to get into court sooner.
So, Neil, Andrew referenced this Mark Meadows trial. There's a lot happening tomorrow, actually. So let's.
All right, so we covered all the Mark Meadows stuff, and we know that there will be a ruling on that at some point. So we'll see what the judge says about the removal. I'm sure we'll get a written opinion on it when it drops. We'll continue to cover it, my friends. Thank you for subscribing and liking this video wherever you're watching, and we'll see you on the next one.